So good morning, everybody. Boker Tov. So last week we discussed that we're going to do every week a little bit of the book Gates of Trust, Shar HaBitachon, with the author Rabbeinu Chaya Ibn Pekuda. So we're going to do a little bit of it today as well and review a little bit of last week just to get back on board. So there was a house of worship in Indiana. And to their dismay, across the street, a developer bought a plot of land and began to build a bar and a casino, and they were horrified. So they did everything to stop it. They called the P&Z, and they made demonstrations, and they tried to speak to the owners to no avail. The developer was determined to complete his project. So as this humongous casino and bar is going up, they decide to have daily prayer service. We're going to pray to God to stop this awful institution that's going to destroy our community's morals and ethics here. And they're praying every single day, but the building is going up. And the day before the grand opening, there's a thunderstorm, lightning strikes the building, and the entire building burns down to the ground, and they are overjoyed. They couldn't believe how their prayers worked. God was listening. A few months later, the members of the congregation are summoned to court. They're being sued by the developer. Your prayers caused the destruction of this multi-million-dollar building. We want remuneration. We want be paid. What is it called? Restitution?
Restitution.
Restitution. Sorry. No, good. No, please. So they come to court and every lawyer pleads their side. The lawyer of the bar says it's their prayers that destroyed our building. There's no other way to explain it. Suddenly lightning strikes. We demand restitution. The lawyer of the congregation says, absolutely not. Come on, how ridiculous can you be? They prayed, so the building got destroyed. Come on. So the judge says to both parties, I need time to contemplate my verdict. But what's very obvious from this case is that the owners of the bar very much believe in prayer. But I have to say, not so much the members of the congregation. They're not such believers. So, Rabbi Beinu Bachya Ibn Pekuda wrote the book Chayves HaLevavos, Duties of the Heart. And what I failed to mention last week is that there are 10 sections, 10 gates. We're doing gate number 4, the gate of trust, the discussion on trust in God. But there are other gates in his book, and this is just one of the 10 gates, 10 sharim, 10 gates of, I want to read you the gates, of his works. The first gate is on unity. The second gate is on examination. The third gate is service of God. The fourth gate is what we're doing, trust, bitachon. The fifth gate is devotion. Sixth gate, submission. Seventh gate, repentance. Eighth gate, examining the soul. Ninth, abstinence. And 10th, devotion to God. Those are the 10 gates, and we are studying the gate of trust, bitachon. And to reiterate what we said last week is that trust in God is not the same as faith in God. Good morning, Donna. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's trust.
I have the book.
Baruch Hashem. Trust in God is not the same as faith in God. Emunah, belief in God, is not the same as trusting in God. What's the difference? So I wrote down 4 points to recap. The difference between faith and trust. And like we said last week, bringing an example from the book, belief in God, faith in God, emunah is like a tree. Not every tree bears fruit. Trust in God is the fruit of the tree. Now, you can't have trust if you don't have faith. You can't have a fruit if there's no tree. but you could have a tree that doesn't bear fruit. Not everyone who believes in the Creator may necessarily trust in God, may not necessarily, like we mentioned last week, feel that every minute of my life is God's oversight, so to speak. So faith is the belief in God's existence. Trust is that he takes care of me and wants my best. Faith is the belief that everything comes from God. Trust is the knowledge that God will provide. Faith is the belief that everything God does is for the good. Trust is the knowledge that we will see the good. Faith can be detached. Trust is internalized and real. And that's why I mentioned that faith and trust in God is something that's an emotional relationship with God. It's not necessarily an intellectual, logical relationship. It's about how you feel. Because many times, I don't know if you've met people that say, I'm lacking faith in God. I don't feel my emunah. I don't feel my godly connection. Is it that they lost their faith, as they say? You can never lose your faith. You know why? This is a very interesting thing from Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Because as I mentioned last week, the story of the cruse of oil. Remember the story with the prophet Elisha? He says, is there nothing in your home? And she says, no, but a little bit of oil. And that oil brought her prosperity. So sometimes you may say, listen, I've lost my faith. After what happened on October 7th, after what happened at the Holocaust, I cannot believe in God. Yes, go ahead, Meredith. You want to ask something?
Sorry, I don't want to take us off track. I apologize. Plus, I'm new here. But you brought up the story of Elisha, which was like the Haftorah last week, right? Or
Right,
2 weeks
yeah.
ago. I just wanted to ask very briefly, because I always find it not troubling, but discordant, right? That we talk about reincarnation, and I don't mean like Ezekiel, and that when the Mashiach comes, the bones will knit together. But this notion of coming back to life, I have always thought of as, understanding Ezekiel and the prediction of, but about like as a Christian concept, right? Like that someone came back to life. And so when I read the, you can come to think, when I read the Haftorah about Elisha, and when that woman who prays for a child and the child dies, and then Elisha's servant comes and he can't bring him back to life. And then Elisha lies on him and breathes in him and brings him back to life. I just wondered, maybe you could just comment on, because I live in a Western, quote, Judeo-Christian society, I'm always troubled by that story, because I had this idea that there is no reincarnation in the moment because the Mashiach hasn't come. So do you mind I don't want to take us off track, and we can discuss offline if you prefer, but since you brought it up, I've been thinking about that the last couple of weeks.
So that's a beautiful question. And you know what? I might address it next week, because I would like to do a little more research. But let me tell you what I remember from my studies. But I'll draw a parallel. Last week, I told the story, because it's a story of the Haftorah. And I explained that very much that Judaism is multidimensional. So the stories we read in the Torah have to be eternal, have to be for all times. So on one hand, we read the story of Elisha with the oil, and it's a beautiful story, and it's a miraculous story. And we read the Elisha with the resurrection of the child, and wow, he brought this child back to life. But also, it is a metaphor based on Kabbalah, on our lives today, our journey. So I explained last week that the journey of the oil, the finding of the oil, is there nothing in your home? Where is the quintessential question? I'm using that story because I was more well versed in it from last week. Is there nothing when you feel disconnected from your core mission, from your purpose? You're wandering aimlessly, and it happens to all of us. Some of us never find our purpose. Some of us occasionally drift away from meaning, and waking up in the morning and like, why am I here? I explained that this is the story of the soul. You wake up sometimes disconnected from children, from spouses, from life, and God says to you, is there nothing left? Can you find some reservoir? You say, not really, but there's a little bit of oil. What is that little bit of oil? That soul. As the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, which is Kabbalah, the book of Kabbalah, teaching Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, that even though, and you'll see how it's connected at times, which I was going to bring in now, where you think there's nothing left and you don't even feel connected, the godly soul that resides in you, whether you like it or not, is always there. It's like a recessive gene. It's our DNA. And at times we can't access it. It's buried so deeply for whatever reason. So we know that it's always there. That's what I was going to say. There's no such a thing as a person losing their faith, because faith is the godly soul. It's the godly connection. It's just buried. So when Elisha resurrects this child, it's not only the story that happened then, which is a true story, and why the child had to die, I will discuss next week, because I would like to present it properly. It's the story of our lives, that we come at times, I'm dead. I've done everything. I prayed. I feel dead. I feel dead. And comes God and resurrects us in a sense. Metaphorically, we're revived in our lives. So every story is the story of what happens, but it's also the story of every person's journey, that we come at times and we're lifeless. Dead man walking, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes in the parsha. And comes God and blows life into us and brings us back. Now, yes, Mashiach, resurrection of the dead, Jews who heard about it said, what do you mean? This is a Christian concept, resurrection. Mashiach, the Messiah. We don't believe in the second coming. That's not us. But if you read the Maimonides, I believe in the coming of Mashiach. I believe in the resurrection of the dead. These are all concepts based in Torah, in truth and authenticity. So what happened? The world adopted it. Different religions adopted it. So we think it's no longer a Jewish idea, but it is. They actually took it from us. So we very much believe in the resurrection. Now, again, Elisha is the one who resurrected the child. You're not talking about you and me blowing ear on a kid and telling the mother, you know what, I can resurrect your child. It is Elisha who is, I mentioned last week, Elijah was his mentor, the prophet before him. And the Torah explains that Elisha was given the double power than Elijah. So could you imagine the power of Elijah, the prophet? Now Elisha double. Thus, these miracles about Elisha indicate that power that he was given by his previous mentor, Elijah. And who gives the power? God. God gives the prophets their power, takes away their power. And also you have to know, it's not power they're using for witchcraft, for idolatry. Everything the prophets did was by the direction of Almighty God. They never acted on their own. That's how you know that somebody's an authentic prophet. Any prophet who starts acting on their own, that's not a real prophet. Prophets, by the very fact that they are acting under God's direction, you know it's authentic. And you say, how do you know? You'll know when you need to know. Like people said to me, how am I going to know when Mashiach comes? How do I know it's not a false Messiah? If it's going to be real, we're going to know. I don't know how we'll know, but we will know. You know when you know, you know. It's like those who know won't ever tell. Those who don't know are always prophesizing. Like the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who we know had certain prophecies, never sold anybody anything. But he would say, don't go there. I'm telling you not to take this trip. You better stay home, or don't take that flight. And people realized later what they were being told. So you have to know that a prophet never tells. They never tell you unless they're told to tell you. You get my drift. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. I hope I answered your question a little bit. But again, to reiterate this very important point, is that everything in the Torah has layers upon layers. Yeah, exactly. And the story of the Torah is the story for all generations, and that's what every week I try to bring out. What does it have to do with us? At times it's a beautiful story, it's a mystical story, it's a funny story, it's a great story. But how will it transform our lives is the question. So that's what I try to focus on, that the stories in the Torah are our stories, our journeys, our lessons, who we want to be. And that's the power of the Torah, that its teachings resonate from generation to generation. Does anybody want to add anything, say anything? Yes, and Meredith pointed out that there were many times false messiahs the Jews followed, and they suffered the consequences of that. It was horrible situations. That's what happens, yeah? At times, Jews were misled. Go ahead, Donna, yes.
Okay, so the people who were writing the stories, how did they know that they were writing stories that were going to be timeless, like no beginning and no end?
The answer is that they did not write the stories, God did.
Okay, so God wrote through them.
Well, when God called Moses up to the mountain, God dictated the Torah to Moses, and Moses physically wrote it down with God was the dictator, Moses was the first court reporter, the transcriber, the stenographer in history. Well, maybe not the first. And the oral Torah, which is the explanation of the written Torah, was later written down by the great sages, like I mentioned last week, because it would have been forgotten. The Jews were being dispersed. We were no longer living in the same tent community. So after the destruction of the second temple, it had to be written. Otherwise, we wouldn't lose our laws. We would not know what is kosher, what is Shabbos, how to blow shofar, how to pray. All the laws and mitzvahs, the oral tradition, which explains the written tradition, which is the 5 books of Moses, was written down, the Code of Jewish Law, and the Mishnah, and the Talmud, and all the writings of the great sages, derived from the oral and written tradition. It's in a nutshell. It's in a nutshell. It's in a nutshell. It's a lesson in itself, how we know what to do now. And now, so just going back to the Shar B'Tachan, and then we'll go to the Torah portion. So faith there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Trust, the tunnel is the light. The tunnel is the light. And this is a lifelong journey. This is a lifelong ambition to trust in God. It's not easy. Like we mentioned last week, the type A personalities. We run the world. My decision is what caused the catastrophe, and so on. Trust is something you have to work on every single minute, every single day. It's not easy to relinquish what you think is your independence. Really, it's not your independence, as we'll be learning as we go along. Because like the story that I mentioned last week, to take your bundles, your burdens, and put them on the wagon and let the driver drive it is the greatest relief. We schlep our bundles and we think we have to do it on our own. All we have to say is, God, listen, take my peklach, as my grandmother would say, which means my bundles, take care of it for me. I can't do it. So I want to just share a few tidbits from the beginning of this great book. And like I mentioned, it was written originally in Judeo-Arabic because he lived in Spain. And later it was translated into Hebrew and now into English. And most importantly, know that Chovos HaLevav is the duties of the heart, which is exactly the title. It addresses not the ritual mitzvahs, putting on a mezuzah on the door, going to the mikveh, eating kosher. It is the emotions, our feelings, duties of the heart. How are we supposed to feel as Jews? This is what this book discusses, which is trust in God is one of those. Man consists of body and soul. 2 parts. And the same thing, we have the action, the things we're doing, and then it's how we feel about everything that we're doing. the emotional. And if you're not healthy emotionally, you know that in life it's very difficult. Emotional health is one of the most important parts of sustaining ourselves, of living a healthy, normal, happy life. So one thing I love about this book also, it brought in all the commentaries, explanations, letters, like people write to the letter. A guy writes to the letter, to the Rebbe, to Lubavitcher Rebbe. He writes, I have troubles with this and troubles with that. This is what the Rebbe writes him. We must know that faith and trust cannot merely remain in our thoughts. They must permeate the totality of our lives. And the first step is knowing that God controls the world. The Rebbe writes, if he can care for 1 billion people, you don't think he can care for you? As God writes, I have made you and I will carry you. I will sustain you and deliver you. This is from the book of the prophet Isaiah. So what's the summation? If God can take care of the entire universe, he can surely take care of you. I remember when I gave birth to number 11, I was interviewed by one of the local newspapers. And the reporter asked me very innocently, how could you love 11 children? I said, if you have love for one, you could have love for 11. If you can't love one, you can't love 11. Love is a feeling, and emotion is boundless, infinite. If God can take care of 1 billion, you think 1,000,000,001, you can't be taken care of. You're left out of the equation. So trust, the first thing is acknowledging that, guess what? God can take care of you. Trust in God means, you know what? God can take care of you. But to reiterate again a point from last week, if you decide that you are dependent on your wealth, you are dependent on your board of directors, you are dependent on your brilliant IQ, God says, okay, go ahead. If that's who you want to trust in, or that's what you want to trust in, go ahead. I let you do whatever you like. And God, so to speak, metaphorically removes God's self from your life because you can do it on your own. You don't need me. You don't need me. That's basically it. So the Chayvus Halavavis gives a beautiful example that when you open up a faucet, once you open up that faucet will just flow and flow and flow. But you need to open the faucet. It's something you have to do in order to benefit from trust. When the faucet is open, the blessings come. But when you close the faucet, what, you're going to wash your hands with no water? You have to open up the faucet. So trust in God is opening up that faucet of trusting. And it, like we said, it permeates your entire life. And what's the benefit of it? Tranquility. Tranquility. When you have trust in God, you're free from worrying. Your energy is devoted to trusting in God. It's like you have a problem you can't handle. You say to your husband, you're going to call the electric company and find out why we're being charged $50,000 a month. And when you tell your husband, don't you feel better that it's off your plate? Now you have other things. It clears your mind space. So this is the same idea. You want to clear your mind space. And I feel that it resonates with me so much because I realize, remember I told you over the summer, I'm taking these long walks and I'm like, what am I going to study now? And my husband buys this book and he says, Freida, I want to repeat the history, even though I mentioned last week, your father was told by the Rebbe to study this book. Why don't you study it? So that's how this journey began for me. And I feel like every day it's giving me a little bit more and more. And I'm feeling like there's an attitude change in my life, and for the good, where things that used to drive me crazy and bother me. No, my father never told me. My husband remembered my father telling him. My husband had a very good relationship, close relationship with my father. They would have long conversations. I didn't even know what they were talking about, but obviously, so I feel like there's a paradigm shift in my life. And that's why I wanted to share it with you. And I hope that everyone will benefit as well. You let me know if you're not benefiting. We could just switch the class. So let me end off with a story, and then we're going to go to the Torah portion. So story is that a group of visitors came to visit a fellow in a town. He had a inn with a bar, which was many times, and the Jewish people owned, they were innkeepers. They rented land from the squire, and they were innkeepers. And they come to the house, they're staying there for Shabbos. And in those days, if you owed rent, the sheriff would come with his stick, bang on your door. If you still didn't pay the rent, a few hours later, he would come back. And the third time, he would bang and arrest you for not paying your rent. It was a very serious situation if you didn't pay your rent to this poritz, to the squire. So the sheriff comes Friday, bangs on the door. The fellow said, "What's that?" He says, "I owe rent, but I don't have any money to pay the rent this month." The sheriff comes back a few hours later, again, Zetz is on the door. Finally, he's about to Zetz on the third time, and the fellow says, "Don't worry, I'm going to pay my rent." And he puts on his coat. And the guests say, "How are you going to pay your rent? You got money in the last few hours?" He said, "God is going to pay my rent. I trust in God." Puts on his coat, he starts walking outside. And the guests are looking through the window. And as he's walking, a wagon pulls up, stops, and they see a conversation ensues, back and forth, like a discussion. And the innkeeper goes like this and walks away. A few minutes later, they see the wagon make a U-turn and chase after the innkeeper. Again, there's a conversation, and they see a handshake. He comes back a little later, and they say to him, "So what happened? What was going on?" He said, "I paid my rent." "You paid your rent?" He said, "Yeah. I told you that I trust in God that I pay my rent." He said, "The wagon people came, they heard I make a delicious whiskey. They came to purchase gallons for their squire, for their poritz. I named them my price, which was a full year's worth of rent. They said, 'What? You want us to pay that price for your whiskey, that amount?' He said, 'Yeah. You don't want it? Don't buy it.' They said, 'All right, too expensive.' Then they come back and they're thinking to themselves, which they later told him, if this guy is charging that price for that whiskey, it must be something out of this world. We're going to pay the price." So they ordered a full year's rent worth of whiskey from me, and I took from that money and I paid the rent. He says, "You trust in Hashem, your rent will be paid." So that's what it is. He walked out the door, he put on his coat, and he said, "I'm going to pay the rent." That's trust in God. I'm reading this story, and I'm like, what? I don't know if I could put on my coat and walk out the door, but that's what it is. It's not the light at the end of the tunnel. It's the light in the tunnel. That in the tunnel, you see the light. That's the level of trust I want to aspire to. Who knows? I don't know. We'll see what happens. But this is what our studies, Gate of Trust, will hopefully to bring us closer and closer to why we should trust. Next week, we're going to discuss the difference between trusting in God, and he's going to bring the story of an alchemist. Who knows what an alchemist is? It's something we don't have anymore. Anybody know? Go ahead, Margaret.
Turns things into gold.
Brown. Yes, go ahead.
Turns everything into gold.
Yeah, it's a person
Like
that
a chemist.
money. Yeah, took precious metals and turned it into metal, and it was illegal. Many places you can't go make money. So he uses a fascinating analogy of an alchemist, what an alchemist trusts in, and what we should trust in. So next week we're going to discuss the alchemist. By the way, there was a show on Netflix, The Alchemist, but it was about detectives. I couldn't figure out why they were called alchemists, but we'll figure it out. So, Meredith, thank you for joining us. Now, next week is Thanksgiving, so we won't have a class. We'll go to the week after.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you for joining us.
Bye. See you soon.
So does anybody have any questions, concerns, rebuttals before we go to the Torah portion? And I also prepared, which I'm going to email you, the meditations. I typed up a sheet of meditations I thought would be very nice to share. I call it the 7 qualities of trust. Today I'll read one of them. God has compassion and love for me. Let go and let God. That's my little lingo. Let go and let God. So just know that God loves you and God has compassion for you. For that alone, we can trust, because one of the things of trusting somebody is, they love you and care about you. Do you go to somebody who doesn't care about you? Why would you trust them? They don't care about you. You want someone who cares about you, trusts. So next week, we're also going to go to the qualities of who you could trust and why. And this is one of the qualities. A person has to have compassion and love for you. Otherwise, how could you trust them? You can't trust somebody who wishes you ill will. You can only trust someone who you feel cares about you and wants the best for you. Like, mothers love to tell their children, I want the best for you. I want the best for you. So for that, I'm going to close the book, Shar B'Tachan, to be continued. Now, this week's Torah portion is a wonderful, wonderful Torah portion. It is the story of one of the most magnificent women and heroines, Sarah, the first matriarch, wife of Abraham. And the Torah portion is called, very weirdly, the life of Sarah. Even though the first passage says, Vatama Sarah, Sarah died. Now you would think the previous Torah portion should be called the life of Sarah, because there you read about Sarah and her greatness. Her Shabbos candles burned all week. Her challah had a special taste, and there was a cloud that always stayed over her tent to show that God was always watching over her. So this Torah portion that talks about her passing is called the life of Sarah. So now I want to use this opening to share with you something very strange in this week's Torah portion. Going back to the storyline last week, Abraham is told by God to bring his son Isaac as an
offering.
An offering. And what happens at the end? Does he bring him as an offering?
They find a goat and he's
A ram? Yes. Yeah.
A ram.
God never meant human sacrifice. He finds a ram, and the ram is brought as an offering on the barbecue pit, on the altar. I call it a barbecue pit because it connotes a more feasible explanation of what the offerings were. People say, what? You burned an animal? I'm like, every week we barbecue. It's barbecuing, basically. So now he's so overjoyed. His son is saved, but he comes home and his wife Sarah heard that her son was brought as an offering. She has a heart attack and she passes away. So he comes home to a funeral, his wife's funeral. So now he needs a burial plot for her. Remember, he's living in the land of Israel. He's settled there. God said, this is your land. I'm giving you the gift. But now he needs to buy a burial plot. Now he needs to buy it because there were strangers living in the land that claimed it was their land. So he had to go buy a burial plot. So he goes to negotiate for a burial plot, and he has a secret that he knows that no one else knows, that there is a cave of Machpelah in Hebron, and Adam and Chava are buried in this very mystical, special cave. So he knows that he has to buy that land and that cave, which will be his burial place, Sarah's burial place. So Avram and Sarah, the next generation, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah. 6 plots that can bury 6 people, besides Adam and Eve. So there was 8 spots. So he negotiates an astronomical price for this plot, this cave called the Cave of Machpelah, and he buys it. And he buries Sarah. But there's a very interesting conversation going on as he negotiates the price for this real estate. Very strange. He says, I'm a stranger and inhabitant with you. Give me burial property so that I may bury my dead from before me. He's talking to the sons of Hecht who own the land. But that doesn't end there. Again, it says, amidst of your choices, graves to bury your dead. And then again, bury your dead. And he spoke with them saying, I will bury my dead. I have given it to you to bury your dead. Again, I will bury my dead. And finally, the seventh time in this paragraph, what is between me and you and your dead, bury. So see, the seventh time it's reversed. The first 6 times, Avram says, I may bury my dead. I needed to bury my dead. I needed to bury the dead. Bury your dead, they respond. Bury my dead. And the end is, and your dead you will bury. So the first question is, what is the repetition? How many times does Avram have to tell the sons of Ches, I need to bury my dead, I need to bury my dead, I need to bury my dead? Isn't it obvious? And why the 7th time it says, and your dead you shall bury here? How come it's reversed? If there's a reason it's written so many times, because we know in the Torah no repetition is coincidental. How come it's not written the 7th time the same way? So there's a fascinating story behind the scenes that nobody knows, or now will know. What happened? So Avram buries Sarah, and when Avram died, he was buried there. When Isaac died, he was buried there, and his wife Rivka. So now you have Adam and Eve buried there, Avram and Sarah buried there, Yitzchak and Rivka buried there. Now there's 2 more plots left, because Avram created 6 burial places. So who do you assume is going to be buried there next? Anybody know? Jacob and Leah. Not Rachel, because remember, Rachel is buried at the tomb of Rachel in Beit Lechem. She died young, and she was buried there, so she should be a place when the Jews were exiled, they would go and pray as they leave the land of Israel, because Beit Lechem is almost at the end of the land of Israel. So she sacrificed her spot in this special cave so that she should be a Mama Rachel, a place for her children to go and pray. She gave up her spot in the cave of Machpelah so that her children will have a place to go when they're exiled from Israel, to a stopover, like the last rest stop before you leave the country. A place of comfort for her children. So we have 6 plots. So now Jacob is living in Egypt. Remember the story with Joseph with the multicolored coat. He becomes the viceroy of Egypt. His father moves down there. Now Jacob dies in Egypt. And he tells his children before he dies, you must not bury me in the land of Egypt. I want to be buried in my rightful burial spot in the cave of Machpelah. So the whole entourage, his children, his grandchildren, the politicians, the congressmen, the senators of Egypt, Yosef, his son, the viceroy of Egypt, all have a caravan taking Jacob, their father, to be buried in the cave of Machpelah. They're traveling to the land of Israel. They come to the cave of Machpelah. They're ready to intern him and say the prayers. And who's standing there? Esau, his son, his brother, Esau, remember Jacob's brother Esau, the redhead, and he blocks their path. He says, excuse me, you can't bury Jacob here. That's my burial spot. The last spot, because Leah was already buried, she died before her husband, is my spot. When Isaac, my father, died, he left me in his will 2 spots, one for Jacob, the younger brother, and one for me, Esau and Jacob, those 2 spots. Now, Jacob gave away his spot to his wife, Leah, so the remaining spot is mine. It's my inheritance. And he doesn't let them bury Jacob. So the children say, no, you forgot. When you sold your birthright to Jacob, Your brother, he bought the plot for an astronomical amount of money. It belongs to Jacob. We even have a paper to prove it. We have a deed to this plot. Esau says, really? Bring it out. Let me see it. They said, we didn't bring it with us. We didn't know that the funeral director would need it. We assumed everyone knew it's our plot. He says, well, you're not burying till you show me proof. So they said, what are we going to do? So Naphtali, one of the 12 sons of the 12 tribes of Jacob's children, was a very fast runner. He was a marathon runner. So they said, you'll go back to Egypt. It'll take quite a while, but go back, bring the deed, and then we'll show Esau and we'll bury Papa. What could we do? We'll have to wait. So Naphtali gets on his horse and he goes back to Egypt to get the deed. It's going to take a while. In the meantime, Dan, another son of Jacob, had a son. His name was Chushim. He was born with a disability. He couldn't hear and he couldn't speak. So he's watching from a distance this conversation and he sees Esau in a threatening manner. So he takes his club, he was very strong, and he thinks Esau is going to hurt somebody because the way he's, acting, and he bangs Esau on the head. And Esau's head falls off, and by some miracle, it topples and rolls into the cave of Machpelah and lands miraculously by the tomb of Isaac. This sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? It sounds like, what are the fairy tale books? Harry Potter. And Esau's head is there. So Esau now is dead. So now Esau is dead. No one is blocking the path. So Jacob gets buried properly. And Esau's head remains in the cave of Machpelah. And they bury his body on the outskirts of the cave. That's the story. Now we understand why it says 7 times bury the dead. 6 for the plots that were bought by Abraham, and the Torah is hinting to us that there would be one more person buried in the cave of Machpelah, Esau. So the Torah alludes to the future of what was going to happen there. That Esau's head ends up by his father's bosom, so to speak. Because after all, Esau was not a good person, but he was the son of Jacob. And he had the potential to be great, as we're going to discuss in the future classes, how Esau had the potential to be one of the greatest Jewish patriarchs, but he reneged on his potential. Wasted potential, wasted talent, wasted energy. So now, last question I have to ask you, and maybe you'll ask me, so why is the wording different? The first 6 plots, the first 6 things, and I will bury my dead. And the last one is, and your dead you shall bury. Who can analyze why by the first 6, it's I will bury my dead, and then the words change, the dead will be buried.
Because the deal was closed?
Okay, possibly. The deal of the 6 plots, you mean?
Yeah, well, it was his negotiation, so he kept on asking, it's gonna be, and then at the end,
Right.
the other guy says, sold. Okay.
No, interesting, good. So think about the first 6 people buried there are righteous people, tzaddikim. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebecca, Jacob, Leah, the matriarchs and the patriarchs of our people are buried there. The righteous of the righteous, the sages, the tzaddikim. Who's Esau? He was a very not good person. So righteous people, the Torah tells us, even when they're dead, they're alive. Like that's why the Torah portion is called the life of Sarah. Ties in a person, a righteous person, a tzaddik, even when they pass away, it's as if they're alive because their values, their morals, their teachings, their descendants take over and reflect who they were. When do you see the power of a person? When they pass away, did anybody remember them? Did anything they contribute to society? Or are they buried and forgotten. When we see why is it called the life of Sarah, to show that look what comes after her. Her daughter-in-law inherited the 3 mitzvahs. Remember when Rebecca went into the tent, the same 3 things came back. The Shabbos candles burnt all week, Friday to Friday. The challah had that special, unique power and taste. And suddenly the cloud of glory, the cloud of God reappeared on the tent. When Sarah died, everything went away. How did Isaac know that this is his bashert, this is his soulmate? Because when he brought her into the tent, boom, she lit candles, they stayed lit. She made challah, the taste was unique. And the cloud of Hashem reappeared on her tent. So how do you see someone's life? By what comes after them. How do you know if somebody did great things? If it endures. If their deeds, their actions, their contributions endure, their teachings endure, you know they were great. If a person dies and nothing is left of them except their shmatas, an outdated wardrobe, what remained? What did that person give to society, to life, to the world, to their family? Evil people are dead men walking. Even when they're alive, they're dead because they do nothing for anybody. They mooch. They drain your energy. They take. They rob. They kill. So that's why by Esav, by the 7th plot, your dead will bury. He's already dead because he didn't give anything to this world. By righteous people, it says, Tzaddik loy meis, a righteous person never dies. You know why? It's not that they don't, the body is alive. It's that their energy remains. Look at the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Just think about it. People said when the Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away, Chabad will fall apart. No, it's growing, 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 growing. Why? Because that a true leader, it's not about them physically sitting on a chair and pointing directions. It's the teachings, the energy, the guidance that stays and continues. See, power dies. If someone lords over you, like the Caesars, the Greeks, the Romans, the communists, power controlled, but power is diminished when the person dies. Where's Julius Caesar now? You scared of Julius Caesar? Where's Stalin now? You scared of Stalin? Hitler, Yamach Shemai. But influence grows and grows because it's positive, it's good. That's the difference between power and influence. The Rebbe had no power. The Rebbe had influence. Sarah didn't have power. She had influence. Everybody wanted to be near Sarah, the matriarch. Everyone wanted to be in her class and eat her food and hang out with her. Power? She had no power. No one was scared of her. Influence she had. So when a person who has influence, who does good, even when they die, they're alive. You feel them. You feel their energy. You feel what they contribute to your life, to society, to the world, their lessons, their messages. That's influence. That's life. And dead and evil people, even when they're alive, they're dead because they do nothing for the world. And that's how it explains. The 6 represent the 6 tzaddikim. The 7th, dead you shall bury. He's already dead. Just put him in there. And that is what the Torah explains about this story with the purchase of the burial plot, which just also underlines how Israel belongs to the Jewish people. Why did Avram pay such an exorbitant sum? So later on, no one could say, yes, it belonged to you. The cave of Machpelah, Hebron belongs to you. Yes. Not only God gave it to me, I paid for this. The tomb of Rachel, we paid for that tomb. It belongs to us, the Jewish nation. No one can take it away. It's my inheritance. When did you come there? You came there before Abraham? God gave it to you. If you read the Torah, Avram buys the cave of Machpelah. It belongs to him and to all of his descendants. This is the story of the cave of Machpelah. So we have a few more minutes. Does anybody want to add anything, say anything? So we could do two things. We could do the story of love at first sight, how Jacob, Isaac meets his beloved Rivka, or we could do, would you like to hear a little bit about that?
Well,
How?
Or
We could do, oh, I have a very little tidbit I want to share. This is a cute tidbit. How you notice that if you look in the history of a lot of the beautiful marriages in the Torah, where did they meet their bashet? Where did they meet their wives? Anybody know? Did they meet them in the movie theater, the opera?
well,
Say that again?
at the well.
At the well. So why do you think so many famous people in the Torah met their spouses at the well? Why not in the opera house? So
Wasn't the well the community meeting place?
very good. At that time, the well was the community. That's where you shared your gossip. So as you're filling your buckets with water, you go, so did you hear what happened to her?
Really?
Did you hear what happened to him? So that's a practical reason. So we see in this week's Torah portion, Abraham sends his servant Eliezer to find a wife for Isaac, for Yitzchak. Who does he meet at the well? Rebecca. Then you have the story of Jacob. Jacob, when he runs away from Esau and he comes to the wells, he meets Rachel. He falls in love with her. Beautiful Rachel in Haran in Mesopotamia. And then Moses meets his wife, Zipporah,
Wasn't sure.
at the well in Midian. Remember, the shepherds don't let the daughters of Jethro take water for their sheep, so he saves the day. He chases them away. I'm like, excuse me, these girls also have to get water. So we have three famous Jewish leaders who find their beloved at the wells. So Donna said, well, that's where they went, meeting place. That was the community gossip center. But the Torah says something very interesting, that a well is symbolic of our relationships. You know, to dig a well was not so easy. They had to really dig deep and dig far and move rocks and dirt to get a well in the olden days. To dig a well was a big job. They didn't have plows and digging equipment. And so Hasidus, Jewish mysticism, says that's what a relationship is. To find your bashert, to have a relationship once you find your spouse, takes a lot of digging. You know, in the beginning, it's like a flowing river, so romantic, it's so pristine, it tastes so delicious, it's pure, it's like refreshing, like a glass of water straight from the well of Miriam. I want to tell you a cute story about the well of Miriam. But what happens? Sometimes there's a storm, rocks fall in, the well dries out, you need to dig, you need to find a new well. And that's what a relationship, it's constant work. So that might be one reason where they meet the girl at the well. Well, that's the story. So cute story about a well, and then we'll close it up, is that when the Jews traveled from Egypt to the land of Israel, they were in the desert. They had no water, they had no food, so they got manna from heaven. And where did they get water? It was called a rock. There was a traveling rock, and miraculously, that rock gave out water like a well. And it was in the merit of Miriam, because remember, Miriam is the one that led the women in Egypt to bring about the Exodus, the redemption. It was in their merit. So it was called the well of Miriam. When Miriam passed away, the well, the rock dried up. It didn't give water because it was in her merit that they had water. And that's when the Jews cry and they complain, and Moshe hits the rock and says, you need to give water again. And the rock says, why did you hit me? God said to talk to me, not to hit me. So the well of Miriam, the tradition is that on Friday night and Saturday night, when Shabbos ends, there's a tradition, there's a transmission that the well of Miriam shows up every Saturday night. And we know that the well of Miriam not only gave the Jews water sustenance, it also healed people. Someone was ill, they drank from that water, they were healed. So my mother and my grandmother taught me that Saturday night, after you do the Havdalah service, with the candle and the grape juice and the cloves, take a little water from the sink or any place where water comes and drink it and say, Be'era shel Miriam, this is the water from Miriam, the well of Miriam. Why? Because you don't know where that well is going to reappear. Is it going to reappear in Puerto Rico, in Westport, in Norwalk? So everyone drinks from the sink or from another source of water in the house and says, Be'era shel Miriam, this is the well of Miriam. And my mother used to say, before you have a baby, drink from it. It'll help with the labor pains. Whatever. It's a very nice tradition. So I always do it for Saturday night after Havdalah is over. I run to the sink. I call out Be'era shel Miriam. I make a blessing and I drink the water. You never know. You never know if indeed the well of Miriam has appeared in my house or in your house or in everyone's house. So this is a cute tradition called the well of Miriam. So last little tidbit, one thing is that we didn't have time to go into the engagement of Isaac and Rivka, but it's very, very interesting how Rivka is the one that gives the water to Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, and she feeds the camels with water, and she gives him water. And we discussed last year, so I didn't want to do it again, of how her kindness was above and beyond. Another person would say, here's my pitcher, go get your own water. Your camels are thirsty. Here's my pitcher, go bring them water. Here's my trough. What she did was above and beyond. And the point I want to make is her kindness exceeded any normal kindness that anyone would do. Because she not only gave water to Eliezer and his whole entourage, she satiated 10 camels, which last night I did the math, which have been 60 buckets of water from the well, going down, going up, feeding the camels. 60 buckets of water for a 3-year-old or 14-year-old teenager. A woman with no one's help. Now that's above and beyond. And I thought about this morning, I want to just share this little insight. I feel it's good to end with this. Is why are the Jewish nation known to be the kindest nation of all? That before we bomb our enemies, we call out, take shelter, we're bombing your city.
Yeah.
Where Israel travels to foreign countries that hate them to save earthquake victims, tornado victims. Where Jews are known for their kindness when we're how much a percent of this world? 14 million maybe in a world of billions of other nations. Why? Like we said last week, Maisa Avei Simin Labanim, that whatever the matriarchs and patriarchs did, they cut through the jungle, they paved the path for all generations. So when Rivka showed this form of kindness to a complete stranger, for no reason other than she had a heart of gold and kindness, she could have said, you're an able-bodied man. Why don't you and your fellows who are driving the 10 camels go bring the water? What are you asking me for water? She didn't even say that. Her kindness paved the path for compassion and kindness for all generations. So when you feel you're generous and kind and you give tzedakah and you help your neighbor and you help in a soup kitchen or whatever we like to do and help, which we love doing, know that it came because years ago, there was a Rivka that brought water to a complete stranger and fed 10 camels. You know what happens with camels? They store so much water to fill them up. You need buckets and buckets and buckets. It's like a hungry kid after a ball game. And she did that. That's where we inherited the level of compassion and kindness that we all have within ourselves. So no, even if you're not feeling very kind and compassionate, you have it in you. Trust me. You have it in you. Just you got to uncover it. And don't feel resentful. Think of Rivka. Because people are sometimes resentful. Why should I give? They're not giving. Why should I do it? Someone else can do it. Doesn't she have children? Can't her children bring her something to eat? I have to cook her a chicken soup. Where are her 10 children? Why aren't they stepping up to the plate? Why can't her son drive her to the airport? Why is she calling me to drive her to the airport? Dig deep. Find your kindness. Find your compassion. You will never, never lose out. Because remember Rivka, for no reason other than because somebody needed a little water, she became the next matriarch of the Jewish people. That's why there's a book called Kind Little Rivka. And when I named my daughter Rivka, after Rebbetzin Rivka, I bought her this little book called Kind Little Rivka. It's the story of Rivka at the well. So Rivka is the quintessential queen of kindness and compassion. And by the way, she's not a pushover. How do you know she's not a pushover? Maybe she's a Nebuch case. Maybe she's a victim. She got threatened. We need water. Okay, I'll bring you water. How do you know? Because later on, she's the one that tells her son Jacob, you go dress up in your brother's clothes and you go get those blessings. She was courageous and she was tough. So you know that she was no pushover. Her personality, she knew when to be tough and she knew when to be kind. That's Rivka. She knew when you need to discipline your child, and she knew when you need to be compassionate and kind. And I don't know, I want to be like Rivka. That's all I could say. I want to be that kind, compassionate person. So we'll end off with saying it to everybody, Shabbat Shalom. Don't forget to light your Shabbat.
Shalom.
Yeah.
We need light. Unite with light. Pleasure being here with all of you today. Next Thursday will be no class. And then the following Thursday we'll resume. And if you want to get a kosher turkey, they sell them in Trader Joe's and other stores. If you need help getting a kosher turkey, call the 1-800-FREIDA turkey hotline.
I've called that hotline many times.